I very deeply believe that we need to teach critical race theory to everybody. Um, when George Floyd was murdered and I started reading anti racism books, it changed my life. And I didn't realize how many racist ideas I had in my head that were put there by society, not me. I didn't sit there wailing and wringing my hands about how miserable, how awful I was, because I didn't do it. I just wasn't aware. If anything, I should have been more ashamed of my complicity, which I was. Um, for example, the idea that Black people are lazy and it's just poverty, it's not racism. I thought that. And it's interesting. My parents were very not racist. I didn't really pick up any racism from them, except my dad was born in 1943. And I remember at one time I had a Black friend whose father had just been had just become the water commissioner in Austin. And he said, "Oh, good for him." And that's something that he wouldn't have said for a white person, I don't think. And as a child, I remember thinking, why is that good for him? That's the only incident I can think of. Uh, when I became older, my dad kind of let his guard down a little bit and says old man things that are embarrassing, but I wouldn't really call him a racist. However, I do have family members who are in small towns around Texas, and I hear it from them. Shocking things that I was like, and I know that there's lots of white people who have family members in small towns who say these things. And I'm going to repeat some of them because it's important to say this stuff out loud and not pretend like racism doesn't exist, because it does. White people just say it to themselves or to each other quietly, right? Uh, I remember driving through this small town with a family member, and they said, "There are those porch monkeys." And it was a poor part of town, I guess. And there were Black men sitting on the porch in the middle of the day not working. And I had never heard that word before. I was a teenager, I think. And I said, "What? What is a porch monkey?" And he was like, "Oh, those Black people that are lazy and don't work." And whoa, I thought less of him, even as a teenager. But I did internalize that. And I did think, yeah, why aren't they working in the middle of the day? What's important to understand is, yeah, why aren't they working in the middle of the day? And to understand that, you have to learn it. You have to be taught it. And we don't teach this in schools because it makes white people look really bad, because white people were really bad. Not us. We weren't alive. So why can't we pull up our bootstraps and our big girl panties and learn about the horrible things our ancestors did? Right? Why can't we do that? Were we too fragile? Why are Black people sitting on the porch in the middle of the day not working? Well, that's a complicated issue. In a nutshell, after they were released from slavery, they were promised 40 acres and a mule. And then the white Southerners rebelled against that and instead implemented Jim Crow laws to take away their civil liberties. Along with that, until 1954, they weren't required to have equal education to us. And so their whole educational system was underfunded. White kids got to go to school, public schools, with lots of money, and Black kids didn't. And then after Brown versus the Board of Education, when schools were integrated, white people found all sorts of ways to not go to school with the Black kids because they'd been taught to hate the Black kids for 300 years. Right. Okay. So they set up white academies. This was the case even in the 1980s. Go watch the documentary Bad Faith. I double dog dare you. It's free on Tubi right now. And so they set up white academies where they didn't allow Black kids to go. I'm pretty sure in most parts of America, the schools are still segregated. In Austin, Texas, they are segregated. I have seen the data. I've seen the report. If you'd like it, I'll email it to you. You can find it actually. Search Austin Independent School District Equity Report 2023. And you can see how segregated our schools are. So that's a problem. The fact is, anywhere you go in America, the schools that the Black kids go to don't get as much money as the white schools, which means what? Fewer teachers, fewer resources. Poverty has its own whole set of problems. If you're not going to good schools, it's kind of hard to advance up the ladder. And so your family stays in poverty. That poverty also is generational because white people had intentional ways of keeping Black people poor. I learned this when I got my real estate license in my 40s. I had never heard of redlining until my 40s. I have 3 degrees from the University of Texas at Austin, and I didn't know this stuff. I wanted to show you an example of this. This is a textbook that I had at the University of Texas at Austin. And in it, well, I'm reading now about the Federalist Papers, by the way, which is what our founders thought about America. So I'm reading it to go like this to all of the Trump supporters, especially the Texans who are saying there's no separation of church and state. But if you read this, I remember reading about Cotton Mather. And it's kind of a weird name, Cotton. And so Cotton Mather, he has 2 writings in this book. And they are The Wonders of the Invisible World and Magnalia Christi Americana. And so I remembered that name. And then I read this. This is by a man with a PhD in African American studies. This book, I got it on Amazon. And when it came, I saw that it had been removed from the library because it's a banned book, because it talks about how horrible white people are. Yeah. Instead of just acknowledging, yeah, we did some bad shit. Instead of just doing that, which is what the Nazis had to do, by the way, they had to answer for their crimes and they moved on. In America, we just keep pushing it under the rug and having issues. So I'd really prefer we deal with it. When I listen to this, Cotton Mather comes across a little differently. Yeah. So Kendi breaks it down by parts and he studies a person. So Cotton Mather is actually part 1. And in it, Kendi breaks down the fact that Cotton Mather was a preacher, who basically taught that white people were superior to Black people and that we're doing them a favor by enslaving them. And he was a very, very, very vocal enslaver. When I went to UT in 2000, why did I not learn that he was awful? Right? Y'all talk about liberal, crazy. I mean, UT has gotten much more conservative, but when I went there, it was very liberal. And even at UT, I was not taught the full truth about Cotton Mather. Isn't that ridiculous? Isn't it ridiculous that this book, a National Book Award finalist, is banned in some libraries in this country? It's ridiculous. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes. And so all these things I wasn't taught. Redlining, what that is. So you have all the Jim Crow laws, right? Where they go to separate schools. They can't drink out of the same water fountain, back of the bus, separate restaurants, everything. We know this. They were treated, it was apartheid. Hitler studied it. The South did it so well that Hitler used our methods for the Jews. So you think Hitler's bad? So was your great grandpa, if you're a Southerner, or, your cousin, if he's in the Klan now, right? Or a neo-Nazi, or you, if you happen to be watching this far into my video, I'm impressed. Keep going. So there's apartheid. They're separated from us in society. They get pushed to certain parts of town, okay, with bad schools, and they can't get mortgages. That's what redlining is. Redlining is when, and we still have these maps. Redlining is when lenders drew a red line around the Black neighborhoods. I guarantee you, you can probably go to your map right now and draw circles where you know the Black people live, right? But racism isn't a problem in America. No, we fixed it all. It's all better. We fixed it when? I don't remember us fixing it. Do you realize when the Brown versus I learned this when I read Democracy in Chains, I believe. All my books run together. But when the Supreme Court decision, Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954, when that came down, Prince George County, something like that in Virginia, they didn't have school for Black kids for 5 years. They just didn't go to school. Anyway, so they can't get mortgages. The lenders literally draw maps and say, don't give loans or mortgages to these people because they're Black and they're lazy. So they stay in poverty because the easiest way to build wealth is through generational wealth, through real estate. And if you can't buy real estate, it's hard to pass it down to your kids. So you just keep renting and you don't build wealth. You keep going to bad schools, you get working class jobs, and then in turn, you know, if you're extremely amazing, maybe you bust out of that. If you're just average or even above average, it's really hard to bust out of that. And with poverty comes what? Depression, drug use. Yeah, that happens to white people too. That's another thing. Reagan, welfare queen, that whole trope, what he did, more white people are on welfare than Black people, but white people still have this like porch monkey perspective about them, right? But racism isn't an issue. No, it's not.